I told my parents I was in labor at their dinner table. My mother told me to call an Uber. My father kept eating. 1 week later, she showed up demanding her grandbaby, and I looked her dead in the eyes and said, "What grandbaby?" I woke up in a hospital bed with no baby, no bassinet, and a state trooper sitting in the chair beside me. Not a nurse, not my mother, not even the absent husband who had evaporated from my life 3 months prior without a forwarding address or an explanation. A state trooper in a gray uniform, sitting with his elbows on his knees, holding his hat in both hands with the careful posture of someone who has been waiting a long time and has prepared something to say. Beside him sat a woman in hospital administration khaki with a manila folder on her lap and the expression of a person who has rehearsed a difficult conversation and is hoping the rehearsal was sufficient. My first thought was, where is my baby? My second thought arrived half a second later when I tried to sit up and my body informed me with comprehensive authority that something significant had recently happened to it. "Ms. Foster," the woman said carefully, "before we discuss your child, there's something you need to know about the man you listed as the father." I looked at her, then at the trooper, then at the empty space beside the bed where a bassinet should have been. The ceiling tiles were the yellow-white of fluorescent lighting. There was an IV in my left arm. The clock on the wall said 6:14, and I didn't know if it was morning or evening. "Where is my baby?" I said. Neither of them answered immediately, which was itself an answer of a kind. By morning, my medical chart had disappeared from the hospital system entirely. By noon, I had been discharged with stitches, a prescription I couldn't afford to fill, an empty car seat, and zero information about anything that had happened after the darkness took me. I drove home alone. This is the part I need you to understand before anything else. I am not someone things like this happen to. That is what I kept thinking for the first several days, in the way that people construct that sentence as protection. I am not someone things like this happen to, before they finish absorbing that it has, in fact, happened, and the sentence needs to be retired. Let me tell you who I actually am. My name is Sophie Foster. I'm 31 years old. I grew up in Westchester County, New York, in the kind of house that has a name, Ridgecroft, my parents called it, after the road it sat on, with parents who were precisely the right combination of wealthy and connected to make everyone around them slightly uncertain of their own standing. My father, Gordon Foster, was a partner at Dunmore and Crane, one of the oldest civil litigation firms in the state. He had the particular authority of a man who spends his days arguing in rooms where being correct is less important than being persuasive, and who has forgotten over 40 years of practice that there is a difference. My mother, Diane Foster, was on the boards of 3 charitable foundations, chaired the annual gala for the Westchester Children's Medical Center, a detail that will become relevant, and maintained the kind of social life that functions as a full-time occupation. She was charming, effortlessly. She was generous, selectively. She loved me, I had always believed, the way certain people love things they have invested in, with genuine attachment that was nonetheless conditional on the investment performing. I had believed this for 30 years. I had organized my understanding of my parents around it with the flexibility required to ignore the evidence that occasionally contradicted it. I had been married to Elias Marsh for 2 years when he disappeared. Elias was not what my parents had expected for me. Not a lawyer, not a finance person, not a man whose family had a house with a name. He was an architect, quiet and precise, with a dry sense of humor and the specific honesty of someone who had not learned to perform. His family had modest money, old but modest, held in a trust structure I had never paid close attention to, and my parents had managed their reception of him with the particular social skill of people who disapprove without saying so directly. I had loved him. I was certain of that. Whatever happened after, whatever I learned, that part was real. He vanished in February. No note, no call, no text. His phone went straight to voicemail on a Tuesday and stayed there. His office said he had resigned. His bank accounts were empty. His clothing was still in our closet, which was the detail that frightened me most. Not the silence, but the clothes. Because a man who leaves with nothing is a man who left suddenly, not a man who chose to go. I was 6 months pregnant. I filed a missing persons report. Detective Carol Wong, Westchester County PD, 14 years on the force, took my statement with the careful thoroughness of someone who understood that a pregnant woman whose husband has vanished is a situation that requires attention. She followed up twice. She had no answers. I spent March and April alone in our apartment, managing the pregnancy and the fear and the specific grinding bureaucracy of a missing spouse, the bank accounts, the insurance, the legal ambiguity of a person who is absent but not confirmed gone. I called my mother. She suggested I come home to Ridgecroft, which I had not done since I was 24, and I said no. She came to me twice, spent 2 hours each time, and both visits ended with a version of the same conversation in which she expressed concern about my situation with a subtext that was entirely about her own. In late April, my parents held their usual spring dinner. 12 people, the dining room that had hosted every significant gathering of my childhood, the good china that came out 4 times a year. I drove up from the city because I thought being with family might help. I arrived at 7 p.m., and by 8:30, I was standing in my parents' foyer gripping the hall table with both hands, my vision going gray at the edges. "I think I'm in labor," I said. My mother raised her wine glass. "Call an Uber, Sophie. We're in the middle of dinner." My father did not look up from his steak. Julian Barrett, his law partner, 60 years old, silver-haired, the kind of man who fills a room by understanding exactly how much space he's entitled to, glanced at me briefly and returned to his conversation. Around the table, 11 people continued eating. I dropped to one knee on the hardwood floor, not dramatically, not for effect. My legs simply stopped holding me, and the floor came up fast, and I caught myself on one knee with one hand flat on the wood and stayed there, shaking, while the contraction moved through me like a building falling. Not one person moved. I drove myself to the hospital. I don't know exactly what I believed about my parents in the 45 minutes it took me to drive from Ridgecroft to Westchester General. I know I was thinking, in the fractured way you think when your body is doing something enormous, that they would come, that someone would call someone, that the story I had told myself about my family, conditional love, yes, but still love, still family, still the people who would be there when being there was the only thing that mattered, would turn out to be true where it counted. It did not turn out to be true where it counted. By the time I hit the ER doors at Westchester General, blood was running down my legs. A nurse named Carla, I learned her name later, she became important, caught me before I hit the floor with the automatic competence of someone who has caught people before and knows exactly how to do it. Then everything became lights and shouting and words that stripped the air out of the corridor around me. Fetal distress, a phrase I had read in pregnancy books and processed as something that happened to other people. Don't push, calm and firm, the voice of a woman who was not panicking and needed me not to either. Where is the father? My husband had been gone for 3 months without a word. I thought, this is the worst night of my life. I was wrong. The worst was still 20 minutes ahead. Then the darkness took me and I stopped thinking anything at all. The state trooper's name was Sergeant Dennis Kowalski, 18 years with the New York State Police. I learned this later. At 6:14 in the morning, sitting beside my bed while I processed the absence of a bassinet, he told me that my husband Elias Marsh had come to the hospital during my delivery, that there had been an incident, and that his whereabouts were currently unknown. What kind of incident? I asked. We're still gathering information, he said, which means I can't tell you yet. The administration woman, her name was Rebecca Sorrell, patient services coordinator, told me my son had been delivered safely and was currently in protective custody pending investigation of circumstances she was not authorized to detail. Protective custody, my son, 3 hours old. Protective custody from what? I said. Neither of them answered. I asked for my chart. Rebecca Sorrell told me the chart was under administrative review. I asked for my doctor. She said the attending physician was not available for comment at this time. I asked for my phone. They returned it to me and it showed 47 missed calls, most from numbers I didn't recognize and none from my parents. I want to be precise about the feeling because I think being precise about it is important. It was not grief, not yet. It was the cold, clear sensation of a person who has just understood that the floor they thought they were standing on is not the floor. That the architecture of the situation they believed they were inside is different, fundamentally, structurally different from the one they actually occupy, and that everything they do next will need to be done without the map they thought they had. By noon, I had been discharged. No chart, no answers, an empty car seat in the back of my 2019 Subaru Outback, a prescription for pain management that I paid for in cash at the CVS on the way home because I needed to be doing something with my hands. I went home. I sat on the floor of the nursery, pale yellow walls, assembled crib, the small folded stack of onesies on the changing table shelf, and I tried to build a rational structure out of what I knew. My son was alive. That was confirmed. He was somewhere. That was confirmed. His chart had been removed. His father had appeared at the hospital and then disappeared again. A state trooper had been at my bedside. There was a pattern to this. I could feel the shape of it the way you feel the edge of something in the dark before you can see it. I didn't have enough yet to name it. I started writing things down. 7 days later, my mother knocked on my door at 9:15 in the morning. I had spent those 7 days calling every number I had. Detective Wong, who had no information about Elias but confirmed he had not been found. The hospital, which referred every inquiry to patient services, which referred every inquiry to legal counsel, which was not available. The state trooper's office, which told me Sergeant Kowalski would follow up when information was available. I had called an attorney, Marcus Webb, family law, 23 years of practice in Westchester, and had 2 hours of consultation that produced more questions than answers, and a list of next steps that all depended on information I didn't have. I had not slept more than 3 hours at a stretch. I had not heard from my parents. My mother knocked at 9:15, and I looked through the people and saw her standing on my small porch in a blue coat with her hair done and her expression prepared, the particular composed purposefulness of a woman who has decided on her approach before she arrived. I opened the door. Sophie. She looked me up and down with a quick, assessing glance she had used my whole life to communicate a dozen things without saying any of them. Let me see the baby. I looked at her. 7 days. Not one call, not one message. My son taken from me in a hospital at 3 hours old, my chart gone, a state trooper at my bedside, and my mother had sent no word for 7 days and was now on my porch with her hair done asking to see the baby. What baby? I said. Her face tightened. Not shock. Adjustment. The face of someone recalibrating. Then a voice came from the shadows of the porch behind her. Male. Cold. Familiar in the way that something familiar becomes uncanny when it appears in the wrong context. Sophie. Elias stepped into the light. He was thinner. Harder in some way I couldn't immediately name. Not muscular, but reduced. Like something unnecessary had been stripped away. His face had the quality of someone who has been under sustained pressure for a long time and has simplified themselves in response to it. He looked at me with eyes that contained something I needed to read but didn't have the context for yet. Enough of this, my mother said. She crossed her arms. Whatever game you're playing, it's done. Games, I said. My voice came out hollow and sharp, the specific register of a person who is functioning on no sleep and maximum adrenaline. My chart disappeared. A state trooper questioned me about my husband. Now you show up together demanding a baby I never even got to hold. I looked between them. Tell me about the games. Elias glanced at the street. Fast. The reflexive check of a person who is being watched or who believes they might be. What did they tell you at the hospital? He asked. Low. Urgent. Nothing. My chart was gone before I I was discharged. My mother stepped closer. Sophie, be practical. Just hand him over. Him. I went still. They never told me it was a boy, I said. The words came out very quiet. I watched Elias close his eyes. A brief, involuntary acknowledgement. The face of a man who has just made a mistake and knows exactly what it cost. I stepped back and slammed the door. I stood in the hallway of my apartment with my back against the door and my hands flat on the wood behind me, and I stayed there for exactly 30 seconds, breathing, while my mother knocked and called my name and Elias said something I couldn't make out through the door. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered on the second ring. A woman's voice. Fast, controlled, pitch low. Check the lining of the diaper bag. The inside pocket, bottom seam. Don't open the door again tonight. And Sophie, do not trust your mother. The call ended. My mother was still knocking. The diaper bag was in the nursery, on the chair by the window, where I had packed it 6 weeks ago in a bit of optimistic preparation. I unzipped every pocket, found nothing, ran my fingers along the inner lining, and felt it. A seam that was slightly stiffer than the fabric around it. A small interior pocket, invisible from the outside, sewn in. Inside, a burner phone, still charged. A small brass key. A folded birth certificate. My son's name on the certificate was blank. Where his name should have been, someone had written one word in black ink. Hide. The burner phone lit up before I could process what I was holding. A message from an unknown number. All caps. Arriving in pieces, the way messages arrive when someone is typing fast and afraid. Your mother sold access to your delivery room. Your husband helped arrange it until he switched sides 4 weeks ago. Flash drive in locker. 214 Grand Central Station. Come alone. Do not contact local police. The precinct captain is Barrett's brother-in-law. I read it 3 times. Then a second message. Your son is safe. But that changes in 48 hours if the buyers confirm the transaction. My mother had stopped knocking. That was almost worse. I went out the back. I drove to Grand Central in the dark, 2 hours to the city, with the burner phone on the seat beside me, and my hands at 10 and 2, and the specific, grinding clarity of someone who has passed through fear into something colder and more functional. I thought about my parents at their dinner table, my mother's wine glass, my father's steak. Julian Barrett across the table, not looking at me, returning to his conversation. He had been there. That detail had been sitting in the back of my mind for 7 days, and now it moved to the front. The locker was in the lower level, Bank B, row 200. Key 214. I found it at 1:20 a.m. with the terminal nearly empty, and my footsteps the loudest thing in the space. Inside, a thick manila envelope, a flash drive, and a handwritten note on a folded sheet of plain white paper. The handwriting was Elias's. Sophie, your mother has been working with Barrett for 3 years. I didn't know when I married you. I found out 14 months ago, and I've been trying to get us out without getting our son killed. I'm sorry I ran without telling you. I'm sorry I didn't find a better way. The flash drive has everything. Financial records, forged documents, wire transfer logs, names. I've sent a delayed release copy to 3 journalists and a federal contact. It goes out in 24 hours unless I personally cancel the send. Barrett doesn't know about the delay. He thinks he has time. He doesn't. Find Nina. The number is on the envelope. She has our son. I read it standing in a train terminal at 1:20 in the morning, with the overhead lights too bright and the tile floor cold through my shoes and my whole body shaking in the controlled, involuntary way of someone who has been holding enormous tension for a long time and has just received permission to feel it. Then I folded the letter, put it in my pocket, and called Nina. Nina Vasquez opened the door before I could knock. She was 43 years old, compact, with dark eyes that assessed everything and gave nothing back until she was ready. She had been an FBI financial crimes analyst for 11 years before going private. Her own firm, 3 employees, specializing in institutional fraud. I learned all of this in the first 5 minutes. She talked fast, with the efficiency of someone who understands that what she has to say is going to be difficult to absorb and is trying to get the structure in place before the weight of it lands. In her arms was a tiny blue blanket. My knees gave out. I had to catch myself on the doorframe. She stepped forward and let me see him, pulled the blanket back from his sleeping face, this tiny, complete sleeping face, and I looked at my son for the first time. He was 8 days old. He was alive. He was real. I sat down on Nina's doorstep, and I did not make a sound because sound didn't seem like the right response to the thing I was feeling, which was larger than any sound I could have made. Nina let me have 30 seconds. Then she sat beside me and started talking. Julian Barrett had been running an illegal adoption operation through Westchester General Hospital for at least 7 years. Not a placement agency, not a gray market arrangement, a criminal enterprise with the specific structure of something that has been built carefully by people who understand institutional leverage. He was the hospital's largest individual donor, which gave him access to administrative systems and personnel that a normal wealthy donor would not have. He had cultivated relationships inside the hospital over a decade with the particular patients of a man building infrastructure. The supply side of his operation worked through a network of women my mother had developed through her charity work, specifically through the Westchester Children's Medical Center Gala organization, which she had chaired for 4 years and which provided access to a regular pipeline of women in vulnerable circumstances. Women who were young or financially desperate or isolated or estranged from support networks. Women who would not have people in their corners when things went wrong. Women exactly like the person I had allowed myself to become. My father, Gordon Foster, provided the legal architecture, forged documents, fabricated adoption records, the paperwork that turned a stolen child into a placed child in whatever filing system someone later looked at. My mother recruited, my father documented, Barrett moved the children and collected the money. My son had been selected 6 weeks before his birth, when Elias, who had discovered the operation by accident through a financial record that crossed his desk in the wrong context, found out that Barrett had identified the trust structure in Elias's family estate, and determined that my son, as a biological heir, stood to inherit a significant asset that a wealthy buyer would pay a premium to acquire along with the child. Elias had tried to get us out. He had gone to the local police in February. Sergeant First Class Ronald Marsh, the precinct captain, who was Barrett's brother-in-law and who had responded to Elias's report by making a phone call that put Elias in immediate danger. Elias had run, not from me, from the people who had just been told he knew. He had spent 3 months building the case with Nina, who had been contacted through a federal financial crimes contact, who had been watching Barrett for 2 years without enough to move. The flash drive was the enough. I sat in Nina's kitchen at 3 a.m., with my son against my chest and my hands going through the flash drive contents on her laptop screen, ledgers, wire transfer records, forged birth records with my father's signature, email chains between Barrett and my mother that were as clear and damning as anything I have ever read. And I thought about a woman at a dinner table raising her wine glass. Call an Uber. We're eating. Then headlights swept across the window. The glass in the front door shattered. My mother's voice came through from the porch in a register I had never heard from her before. Raw, stripped of the social performance, the actual voice underneath. Sophie, he belongs to the family that paid for him. Everything happened fast. Elias came through the back door with blood on his face. He had been watching the street. Nina had told me he would be watching the street. And he shoved the flash drive into Nina's laptop and pulled up a transmission interface I didn't understand. Barrett's here, he said. Your father too. They found the locker. The delayed release, already sent. 3 journalists and a federal crimes investigator at the Manhattan field office. He met my eyes. Delayed 30 minutes. It went 15 minutes ago. They cannot stop it. My father's voice from outside. Controlled, lawyerly, the voice he used in courtrooms. Sophie, come out. Let's resolve this. Barrett walked into the hallway from the front. The door had been partially destroyed by whatever they had used on the glass, and he came through it with the easy, unrushed entry of a man who believes he is in charge of what happens next. He was holding a gun. My father stood behind him, 62 years old, in his good coat, holding a gun loosely at his side. My mother came in behind them. She looked at the laptop screen, the transmission confirmation, the files, the sent receipt, and she screamed, not in fear, in fury. The sound of someone watching something they built get dismantled. You've ruined everything, she said. Then the sirens hit. I learned later. Nina had a silent alarm linked directly to the FBI field office in Manhattan, installed when she started the case, triggered the moment the front glass broke. Federal agents had been 12 minutes away. They were 8 minutes ahead of where Barrett thought they were. Elias tackled Barrett from the side. Clean, hard, the tackle of a man who has been waiting for the specific moment and has identified it correctly. The gun skidded across the tile floor. An agent coming through the back caught it before it reached the wall. Agents came through every door simultaneously. My father went down in the hallway. My mother ran for the kitchen. They cuffed her at the back door, which was the door I had always used as a child coming home from school. And I stood in the hallway with my son against my chest, and I watched it happen. An hour later, I was wrapped in a blanket at the back of an ambulance while a paramedic checked my vitals, and 2 federal agents took my statement. And Nina sat on the back bumper of a second vehicle 20 feet away, calm and precise, answering questions from a man in a suit who was writing everything down. Special Agent Maria Torres, FBI Financial Crimes Division, 14 years with the Bureau, came to me at the ambulance and introduced herself with the particular directness of someone who understands that the person she's talking to has just survived something very large and needs information more than she needs comfort. The transmission was received, Torres said. We had the files before they arrived here. This is federal now. It will not be dismissed or redirected through any local channel. She looked at me steadily. Your father, your mother, and Julian Barrett are in custody. The hospital administrator who facilitated the records deletion is in custody. We have 4 additional persons of interest and expect to make arrests within 48 hours. How many children? I asked. She paused. We're still determining scope. Minimum 11 confirmed cases over 7 years, possibly more. I looked at my son's face against my chest. 11 families, 11 mothers who had gone through what I had gone through, or some version of it. Some of them had probably not gotten their children back. Some of them might not have known for years that there was anything to get back. I thought about my mother at her charity galas, the warm, practiced smile, the fundraising totals announced at the podium, the women she had identified through her network, assessed, selected. I thought about the wine glass. The paramedic finished her checks and stepped away. The ambulance bay was bright and cold and full of the organized activity of federal containment. Down the street, 2 separate vehicles were being loaded with people I had known my entire life. My mother was loaded into the rear vehicle last. She turned as the agent guided her toward the door and looked back through the dark until she found me, standing at the ambulance, my son against my chest, wrapped in the blanket they'd given me, watching. We looked at each other. The woman who had told me to take an Uber while I bled on her floor, looking at me from the back of a federal vehicle while I held the grandson she had sold. I did not look away. She did not look away. And then the door closed, and the last thing she saw was me standing there holding my son. And the last thing I saw was her face, and whatever was in it. I have thought about this many times, and I still cannot name it with certainty. It was not nothing. It was not nothing, which made it worse. 10 months later, my son's name is James Elias Foster. I gave him my name and his father's middle name, and I gave him James because it belonged to no one on either side of our family and was therefore entirely his. He is 10 months old. He has Elias's eyes and my stubbornness, which everyone who meets him observes immediately, which I consider a genetic inheritance and not a warning. Elias and I are not together in the way we were. I don't know if we will be. What we are is something without a clean category. story. Two people working their way back toward trust from opposite sides of an enormous amount of damage, with a child in the middle who deserves the full, honest version of whatever we can build. We are trying to give him that. Some days we are better at it than others. The federal case concluded in September. Julian Barrett pled guilty to 14 counts including federal trafficking charges, money laundering, and conspiracy, and received a sentence of 22 years. My father, pursuant to a cooperation agreement, received a reduced sentence of 11 years. He provided testimony that expanded the scope of the investigation by 6 additional cases, which I have complicated feelings about in ways I haven't finished processing. My mother did not cooperate. She went to trial. She was convicted on 18 counts and sentenced to 19 years. Her attorney argued in the sentencing phase that she had acted out of financial desperation, that the Fosters' lifestyle had exceeded their means and she had made desperate choices. My attorney, Marcus Webb, provided the court with a financial analysis showing that the Foster household had been solvent throughout the period in question, and that no financial desperation had existed. She chose it, not from need, from a calculation about what my son was worth to someone else. I testified at her trial. I was on the stand for 4 hours. My mother sat across the courtroom from me in a gray dress and looked at me for most of it, and I looked back and I told the truth completely and without revision. There was one moment, near the end, when the defense attorney asked me what my mother had said when I told her I was in labor. I told him. He asked if I had interpreted it as uncaring. I said I had interpreted it as what it was, evidence that she had already made a decision about what my son was worth to her and wanted him delivered safely to the hospital for reasons that had nothing to do with his welfare or mine. My mother, across the courtroom, closed her eyes. That was the only moment she looked away. Nina Vasquez received a federal commendation for her work on the case. She is currently consulting on 3 additional investigations that grew out of the Barrett network. She sends me photographs of James sometimes, from the night she held him, and I keep them in his baby album beside the photographs from the hospital. James does not know any of this yet. He is 10 months old, and his world is small and complete and consists primarily of blocks, a stuffed rabbit named Gerald, and the specific triumph of pulling himself to standing on the coffee table leg, which he achieves approximately 30 times a day and celebrates each time as if it is the first. I will tell him, eventually, all of it, accurately and age-appropriately and completely. He deserves the true story of how he came into the world and what his parents went through to bring him home and what it cost and what it was worth. He was worth everything. He is worth everything. My mother knocked on my door 10 months ago and asked for her grandbaby. I told her I didn't know what she was talking about. I said it because I had been given the word hide on a blank birth certificate and I was following instructions and I needed her to believe I had nothing. But here is what I know now, looking back at that doorway with the 10 months between me and it. There was also another truth in those words, a truer truth. The grandmother she was asking about, the one who appears at doors and wants to see babies and has earned that want through love and presence and the specific reliability of people who show up. That grandmother did not exist. What existed was a woman who had looked at her daughter's child and seen an asset. That child is not that woman's grandbaby. He is mine, and I went out the back door and got him.